The AA Big Book, and I've been covering some of the chapters in recent days. And the reason for doing that is that some people I've met recently can't read too well. Not because they don't want to read or they're not intelligent, it's just that either they haven't learned how to read or they have learning problems. And for many years I didn't realise I had dyslexia, and it took me years and years and years of practice to read at all. And even now I can be confounded and lose my place and lose the sense of meaning. So I go as I can. And yesterday I covered chapter 3, today chapter 4, We Agnostics. But I must say I've had a good day. I've been to 2 meetings, one which is called Just for Today in Pont Street, sun shining, blue sky with bits of cloud and the magnolia blossom on the tree. And the reason why I say that, I took some photos. It was good. But the meeting was good because it was all about truth and honesty and acceptance of life on life's terms, rather than no acceptance of life on life's terms and wanting it all my way. Acceptance is a key. So chapter 4, and I went to a meeting tonight and then out to dinner with some friends as well. Now, that's been a perfect day for me, because I rarely go out to dinner. I'm not always good at socialising after meetings, the meeting after the meeting. But whenever I go, I feel better and uplifted, because I've been in the company of people who are sober and making life work as it can, or living life as it can be lived. So, chapter 4, We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. But only you can say it. I can't say it. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death, or to live life on a spiritual basis, are not always easy alternatives to face. Which comes down to what do we believe spiritual to be? And this is not in the book, but in my understanding over the years, spiritual is the ability to cope with reality, because reality is where it's happening. And that's not a glib statement. Spiritual is not actually about religious views or faiths, although they are embodied in those religious views or faiths. Spiritual is the ability to live in the moment of now, truthfully, open and honest and willing to be a part of life. That's how it seems to be for me, and I'm learning this from other people. But it goes on to say that it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were exactly of that type. At first some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics, but after a while we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So nobody's going to pressure you into a particular faith or religion or a belief. It's what you come to understand works for you. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshalled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. And in my personal experience, self-will will fail, because if we try and run our lives like with an iron discipline, self-will will fail. It's always up against the hard edge of reality, and we don't control reality. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how would we find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here the difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. And for me, when I think of my life, I was brought up in a household where there was spiritual living. That is, everybody was living in the moment of now, but the quality of that spiritual experience was quite difficult to measure as good or bad. We had no real compass around a higher power, other than, some things were good and some things were bad. So I had a notion of good conscience, and I would guess in my early life, agnostic, not knowing what to believe, atheist, not believing in God at all, through to believing in something which may be called God, but not necessarily of the understanding of other people. So that was the big hurdle for me, a program which talked about God, and it really did undermine my confidence in recovery, because how on earth was I going to believe in something I could not define nor understand? So it comes down to what we come to understand on a personal level, which is really important. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. And certainly that was true with Church of England for me. But it didn't seem to stick, because through the 60s and 70s the Church of England didn't really seem to register. It was the swinging 60s and the mad 70s. Perhaps to impress them during our childhood, perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We look upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and in inexplicable calamity with deep scepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it at all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. And that's it, you see. When we hear what other people tell us God is, or their God, the God of their understanding, often we cannot even understand what they're talking about. So I had to put aside other people's understandings of what God could be. And at the same time, no, I can't define God, because if there is one, and it made the universe, or he or she or it made the universe, I could never explain or define the universe, so how could I ever define a higher power? Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. And I think that's an important statement. It was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. But as I know, the wisdom of other people is superior to mine. The collective wisdom of the planet is far superior to the wisdom I will ever learn in my lifetime. So if I could say to myself, God works through people, and the wisdom I hear, which is better than the wisdom that resides in me, I could let go and let the wisdom in from other people. And this is not me trying to work my way around it. It's just saying, honestly, I don't know and could not define God. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. So it's not what another person feels or believes to be a higher power. It's what an individual, you or me, decides is a higher power, as long as we are not it. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. So if God works through people, I'm in contact. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who speak to him. To us the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. So if we were all working together, a higher power seems to work for me. But this is the power on earth, if you like, how it manifests in reality. It's not actually waiting for God to make me better. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your conception of God, your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. And for me, spiritual growth is the ability to see, live, and be a part of the reality today. To effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him, afterward we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth, but if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere, so we used our own conception, however limited it was. And actually, it's not limited at all. It's actually only limited by what we refuse to open up to, and that's reality. So when people say God is now, I just didn't know what they meant, but now I have an understanding that if reality is our spiritual connection to living, and it is, as far as I can make out, then God is now, can only be now, and forever now, not in the past and not in the future. It's how it manifests and how you understand it which works for you. I hope that's not too confusing. It was for me for years. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? And for me the answer was yes. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I am sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. I like simple levels, actually, because it means I can understand them. So faith doesn't need to be complicated. Indeed, if we make it complicated, we'd probably turn it into something it's not, something which binds us and controls us. And the program is about freedom of choice. So I like the simple level. Besides the seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice, And in those stakes, this particular individual reading out now was a defiant, stubborn son of a gun. I don't know why. It's just the characteristics that seem to keep me going. Certainly kept me going on drinking. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Or in other words, there's no way out. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. And I guess I always thought that I had to stand on my own 2 feet, take control, and be the major power of whatever was happening around me. And I don't think I did it deliberately or with any particular perception or intent, but it just seemed to be what I thought I ought to be doing, without really referencing what is the big picture, where is the wisdom from other people. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them with a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life, as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence, right there our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our intentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? And it would be rather vain if we thought we were the be-all and end-all of everything. After all, if you looked at the universe, even from a scientific point of view, we're hardly even a piece of dust. Yet this piece of dust is extraordinarily important to us. So why not be in it? We who have travelled this dubious path beg of you to lay aside prejudice, even against organised religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices, when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colours and creeds were demonstrating with a degree of stability, happiness and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. And when we actually start to say to ourselves, what is the purpose of life? And I sometimes like it reduced down to being able to love, be loved back and useful. And around that, everything else will follow. but that's just me. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. And this is the thing of prejudice, whether it's race, colour, creed, religion, whether they've got 2 feet or no feet, it's prejudice. And as soon as prejudice creeps in that we might know better, or we see other people as weaker, or not so clever, or not so gifted in some way, then we're on the road of prejudice. And how dare we? Everybody has a right to be here. And it sounds to me, with those sirens going, somebody ought to be locked up very shortly for whatever behaviour is going on. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. And after all, they're only ugly to us; to others it's beautiful. In our personal stories you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives the power which is greater than himself. And don't forget, each person who has a power greater than himself, or recognises a power greater than themselves, tends to participate in life rather than try and run and control everything, because we can't. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little or no difference, or to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried, which is why we don't bring our faith, our religion and politics into fellowship. We only have one desire: to be sober today. And it doesn't matter what our backgrounds are. If somebody's got some wisdom and it sounds right for us, why not use it? Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little or no difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. Free will, always. Free choices, freedom of choice to believe what we believe. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous and the humanly impossible. As the celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, which is where alcoholism took me, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, that's everything that I had, I could not stop drinking, they found that a new power, peace, happiness and sense of direction flowed into them. And for me, it took a while. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Again, though, that the conception of that power greater than us, or accepting there is a power greater than us, if you ask each individual, you'll get a slightly different definition, because that's just the nature of humans. And that's not me poking fun, it's just being realistic. There are 6.5 billion people on the planet, each with an outlook which changes day by day. Some get closer to a power closer to believing in a power greater than themselves, and others don't. It's just how life is, and how difficult we can make life. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable at the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight of the Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly, and the best mathematical minds also proved that a bee couldn't fly? Had not people said God reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, "I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either." Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. And if you hear the noise of clanking bottles in the background, it's one of the restaurants close to where I live, taking out the empties. I smile when I say that, because it happens every night. And it always makes me smile, because I haven't drunk any of them. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. And this is where it comes down to, for me, God works through people, the ever-improving wisdom that I hear around me, not only in the fellowship, but from other people too, talking about the truth of now. The Wright brothers almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems, when others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them. We began to feel like those who had insisted the Wrights could never fly. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We, agnostically inclined, would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said we don't know. But actually, I don't mind not knowing. If I start with I don't know at the beginning of the day, and I can be teachable and I can learn things, when it comes to spiritual matters of the heart, and living well, to good conscience, where am I going to get my wisdom from? Am I going to manufacture it, or am I going to hear it around me? When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else He is nothing. So this is where it's important whether or not you have a belief in a power greater than yourself. God either is or He isn't. What was our choice to be? So my God is a practical God, is what I feel works for me. But then again, everybody must have their own point of view. Not must. Everybody has got a point of view. Will work it out for themselves. That's the only way it can be done. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought lustre to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our own support. Yeah, it sort of makes sense when it's read out like this. Well, it does to me anyway. But you see, I've been doing it for a few years, so that was natural. But let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful, to the God of reason. So in one way or another we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. And I really like that, because, just having faith that things can work out if the circumstances are there, that they will. And being open to those circumstances happening. We found too that we had been worshippers. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. Well, I haven't had any yet, but that's just me. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? And then, with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us has not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? The simple answer is not very much. Little or nothing we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? So yes, we have hard science, but when it comes down to the absolute quality of life, it's how we feel about it. Are we loved back? Can love back? Are we useful? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else. Imagine life without faith. Well, that reminds me of my last days of drinking. Were nothing left but a pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life, of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? More police going out for more stuff. Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seemed to be more intelligent than that, at least so the chemist said. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, because we humans can be quite unreasonable. Though it emanates from our best minds. What about people who proved that man could never fly? Yet it had been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. In other words, we'd liked it to all be down to us. And as individuals, it's not true. Nothing is actually down to the individual per se. It's down to where we are in the way the world works today, with all the 6.5 billion other people on the planet. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman and child is the fundamental idea of God. And for that, some say God is love. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves, and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives, are fact as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our make-up, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then if you wish you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. In this book you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school, where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, even more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse, brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have ever known are wrong? While pondering the answer he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It cried out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from the bridge to shore. For the first time he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude had shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night, years ago, it disappeared, save for a few brief moments of temptation. The thought of drink has never returned, and at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly he could not think even if he would. God had restored him to his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker. Then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have earnestly sought him. When we draw near to him, he disclosed himself to us. And for me it's very simple. In some parts of our lives we may be agnostic, we may be atheists, and we may be believers. if we find the fundamentals of how to live in harmony with our insides, understand reality as it is, keep on getting wisdom from others, the debate seems to go silent in me. So I don't know what your understanding of God may be, but I've got one myself, and it keeps on changing and growing and ever evolving, and it's not me. So as I say at the end of these videos, to God or good conscience, as you come to understand and believe for yourself, and the higher power is what you choose it to be, good orderly drunks, the wisdom of other people, the collective wisdom of the universe, whatever it happens to be. If it works for you, let it work for you. So to God of good conscience, as you understand, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference for me is just for today.